I became interested in the exchange, frankly, the fact that my father is a member since 1949. He was a runner in 1947. And so I think it was just normal conversation at dinner. And so I became interested from a young age. My education background centered around psychology. I was a psychology major and an economics minor. And I studied investments. I read Barron's all the time. And then we talked about trading in the house, and that was my background. The only membership I've owned was a Board of Trade membership. In those days, back in the 70s, that was the only membership you could have. And it was a full membership. It was originally my mother's membership. I did a family transfer. Here I am, probably 21, and I was home for the summer, going into my senior year, and being so young and fit and all, the first Friday I was home, I was watching TV, and all of a sudden I realized I had to go to bed, and it was only 9:30. So I had to get in shape for trading, but outside of that, I did fine physically. They closed the floor. Up until then, I was very active on the floor, and I've continued to be very active in trading on the machines. It was a big office of I don't know how many people, 2,000 people. That was my office, and once I would be done trading after a period of time during the day, I would walk around and talk to other traders, and we'd talk about sports, but we'd also talk a lot about business, and that was a very enjoyable environment. And there were a lot of great stories. We were a very unique club. It was a very unique office, to say the least. Well, I have one horrible memory, and that's when Chernobyl happened. And all of us had been trading options for a grand total of 1 year. I think Chernobyl started in 85 and 84 options started. And there was a big bear market in beans, and a group of us all just sold way out of the money calls, which worked just fine until Chernobyl happened and volatility exploded. We were all trying to figure out what volatility was. And that was a pretty bad experience. I probably had my best trading day as a scalper, but what I lost in options exceeded it. It was a bad 2 or 3 days. You know, being a 21-year-old living in a fraternity house, and I'm talking to people 60, 70 years old and almost as a peer. I found interesting and very unique, but I love being on the floor. If one is in business and they're in an office with people who are pretty much just like them, and on the trading floor, I was with people from all over the Chicago area of all different nationalities and types, yet we were all just a group. As my father always said, the economic opportunity was unlimited. You worked up till 1:15, 1:30 during the day, and then you were done to have the rest of the day to be whatever you wanted to be. And it was either homework time or it was racquetball time, as far as I was concerned. The opportunity was unlimited. When I got started, I was just scalping spreads. And when the tax laws changed, I knew that I better figure out another way to trade. And that eventually evolved into speculating on spreads. And it took me till 1991. So it had been 17 years from when I got started, I started speculating in spreads. I'm 66 and I'm still learning. Options is really a very difficult business. And I was talking to a friend of mine at the SIBA one day, where I'd exercised my rights. So I was at the SIBA one day, and he said, Danny, a successful options trader is somebody who, when he was growing up, was great at poker and great at math. And I'm thinking to myself, well, okay, I'm 0 for 2. The strategies are the easy thing to know. The hard thing is the one that apply them appropriately. The worst error I ever made was with Tommy Brown. He was the broker and I was the local on the trade. And I realized he was right. And with that, I swallowed and said, okay, you're right, I'm wrong, I got a problem. And so I just took a loss pretty quickly, to tell you the truth. That when I was a broker, they were chaos. We had volatile markets to begin with, but we also had two traders in the bean pit who I thought were off their rocker. And one trader was a big bull, so if the market opened higher and it was supposed to, let's say, open at 20, he'd go bid 30 just so he can get a printout. Well, when that happened, there was another trader who was a big bear. And if you see that the low price was 5, he makes sure the low print was 10 cents lower there. And as a broker, it's really hard to sort your deck because you never know what you're going to have to fill. So that was the chaos I felt. It was pretty bad. One time when I was first getting started, soybeans were trading 30 cents higher and the spreads were out of line. And there was no trade except if you got lucky and there was a trade. You can spread out of line, but there was few and far between. And I remember talking one day in the summer of about 76, I was talking to Tom McGurn, who was a soybean trader. And I said, Tom, why are you sticking around? There probably won't be a trade today. He said, Danny, I used to work in the docks. And believe me, if I can make money just sticking around in the beans, make a trade and make $500 compared to what I used to make in the docks, I'm going to stick around. So I took that as a sign I better stick around, which I always tended to do. Well, you just try and get close. Being a spreader, I was not on top of a broker. Scalpers might stand next to a broker like they're a machine. But I just tried to stand as close as possible so when they got a spread order, I can make the trade and then go lay it off in the front month. But other people, they didn't know how else to do it, so they just stood there for 3 hours and 40 minutes a day. But I didn't do that. Well, the only person I can talk about who did something really nice was my father. Because one day I was talking to him, and I go, Dad, I got a 102 fever, I think. He said, well, what are you doing at work? I said, well, I've got to update my position. And only I could do it. And he said, no, I can do it. And by then, my father had been a member for God knows how long. And he said, no, you're not going to work. I'm going to go trade tomorrow and get you even. So I said, okay, fine. So he called me up the next day. I said, how'd it go, Dad? He goes, it went great. I go, what do you mean it went great? You shouldn't have done much of anything. He said, well, I bought 400 oil and sold 100. I go, that's not what you're supposed to do. He says, don't worry. I'll deal with it. So he called me up 20 minutes later and said, okay, I'm out of the position and you made a bunch of money. I go, well, how'd you do that? He says, I just traded and that was it. So the next day, I went to the floor and I saw Mark DeLayden, my friend in the soybean oil broker. He just says immediately, he goes, your dad's unbelievable. I go, what are you talking about? He screwed up the whole pit. He got everyone short and he was long and until he got done trading and nobody could do anything. Where somebody was coming from in life, no matter what their wealth was, they're just people. That's all. I remember one time I'm looking on the trading in the bean pit, as a matter of fact, and I just knew better. I said, there's a lot of people who are wealthy, but nobody would ever know it. They're not showing their wealth. They're just normal people. And that stuck with me, for a long time because here it is in 2019, and that probably was in 1980 that I saw that. Nobody thought they were special. My father taught me never risk more than 20% of your capital. And he was the mentor. And people thought that, oh, Lee Stearns, your father, he must have taught you so much. But my father is a DNA trader. And he really couldn't because he didn't know how he was trading himself. He just knew how to do it. That's all. There were some people I went to as far as when I started speculating in the spreads. And now that I think about it, one of them was Bert Thelane, who was a broker and a local in soybeans, trading spreads. And it was 1983. And I said, okay, Bert, you've talked a little bit. I'm ready to speculate in spreads. What do I do? He says, well, here's the spread we're trading now. Do what you want. There's big orders. And I remember it was May, July, and it was trading at 8 cents. The orders were. But the spread itself was in the pit because it was volatile. It was trading 8.5 to 8 in the orders. And after I made a number of trades for 3 days away from where the orders were and just taking profits with the brokers, I thought to myself, what do I need this for? So I just didn't really get into trading speculation-wise until 1991. And then I talked to Dick Whitlow and went back to it. And for some reason, he said, don't trade oil spreads. I said, okay, but I did trade oil spreads. Just took a little longer. I was in 2, 3, 4 committees. I can't remember which ones, except for I know one time in arbitration, we used to pass off the chairmanship from time to time. So I was about 28 or 29 years old, and I was the chairman of the committee for one meeting. And I remember there was a broker, or a lawyer, I should say, a lawyer from Hutton representing someone. And after the hearing, I went over to the water tower, and who would I bump into but the E.F. Hutton broker? And so we say hello, and he goes, Danny, let me ask you a question. Do we have a shot at winning this? And I'm thinking to myself, my God, I'm 29, he's an attorney who flew in from New York. He's asking me, but I said the standard line, you'll find out in 5 days. Yeah. I probably paid attention to electronic trading for the first time when it was brought to the Board of Trade. And it was a convenience for me. Until then, I didn't really know or pay too much attention. And I started paying attention to it a lot when the floor ended. Electronic trading has its pluses and it has its minuses. There's a lot of pluses to it, which are obvious. As far as negatives, one thing that was important to me as a floor trader, a pit trader, was to read the market, see what the brokers are doing, and develop ideas based on that. I'd see a commercial firm make a certain trade, and based on that, I would think X, Y, or Z. Now that it's all off floor, and you don't really know what the commercials are doing, you can guess at best. It makes it a lot tougher, but that's the way it goes. Only the strong survive.